A man is ambushed in his home in the dead of night.
The victim was lying face down in front of the stereo.
He had been shot 3 times, once in the back and twice in the head.
The light bulbs in the house had been unscrewed. So he was in total darkness, ambushed and killed right there in his own living room.
Faced with a puzzling crime scene, investigators turned to the victim's personal life.
They thought that at one point that he had another girlfriend.
When was the last time you knew of him having an affair?
Here's having one now.
Was this a spurned lover or a love triangle?
Or maybe his wife was trying to throw them off her trail and maybe pointing the finger at the girlfriend.
They just didn't have any real evidence at that time.
It takes investigators years and multiple sting operations to uncover the truth and bring a cold-blooded mastermind to justice.
They asked her if she would wear a wire and go have a conversation.
When I found out they had planned this, it was jaw-dropping.
It was like betrayal.
She had taken out a couple of life insurance policies worth $120,000.
To her, he was worth more dead than alive.
Vero Beach, Florida is usually a quiet, family-oriented community. But on March 24, 1991, while most are sound asleep, a late-night patrol officer responds to a complaint made against a resident of a local trailer park.
When the call originally came in, it came in as just a noise complaint, something that we work a lot of.
Patrolman responded to that 911 call, and he arrived at the trailer, heard a very loud stereo blaring from the residence.
It's about 4 a.m. Could be a party. Could be somebody who doesn't realize how loud their music is.
The officer goes into the trailer, tried to turn on the lights. The lights would not come on. So he had to use his flashlight.
The trailer appeared to have been ransacked. There were papers strewn everywhere. Drawers were open. Things were turned over.
As the officer steps further into the room, he makes a grisly discovery.
There was a subject laying on the ground in a pool of blood, pack of cigarettes laying next to him. It appeared as though somebody possibly shot him.
The officer immediately secures the trailer and calls for backup. When homicide investigators arrive, they begin processing the scene for evidence.
The victim was lying in front of the stereo. It appeared that the victim had just arrived home because he was dressed in his work clothes and still had his car keys near him.
It was determined he had been shot 3 times, once in the back and twice in the head.
There was a speaker moved near the entrance where our victim entered the door. It was consistent with somebody that was hiding directly behind the door.
A driver's license in the victim's wallet matches the address and identifies him as 30-year-old Alan Pfieffer.
You have somebody who is deceased in their own house and somebody has ransacked it. Your first impression would be, this is a robbery or a burglary gone bad. But his wallet was still there. His keys were still there. His car was still there. The fact that there was no forced entry or appearance of any forced entry raised the suspicions of the police immediately.
When detectives discover why the lights aren't working, it's another sign that Alan stumbled into a trap.
The light bulbs in the house had been unscrewed, so even if Alan Pfieffer came into the house and tried to turn on the lights, he wasn't going to be able to. So he was in total darkness and was ambushed and killed right there in his own living room.
Evidence of a woman's belongings inside the home make it clear that Alan does not live alone. And in the driveway outside are two cars, a Pontiac Trans Am and a bright red Pontiac Fiero.
When our officers ran the plates of the vehicles that were at the residence, one of the vehicles belonged to Alan Pfieffer. The other vehicle belonged to Alan's wife, Connie Pfieffer. Now we're getting really concerned about where is she at?
Has something happened to her? Has somebody hurt her? Has somebody taken her away? We don't know. At that point, the police are trying to find out exactly what was going on in Alan Pfeiffer's life.
The list of questions that investigators had was lengthy. Did Alan have any enemies? Is there anybody that they owed money to? Where's Alan's wife?
Alan Frederick Pfeiffer was originally from Norfolk, Virginia. He was born May 19, 1960, the oldest of two children raised by Judith and Ronald Pfeiffer.
Alan was a year and 15 days older than me. We were both born in Norfolk, Virginia, because our biological father was in the Navy. And then he and my mom got divorced, and Mom brought Alan and I back here to Michigan, where she was from.
Alan and his sister did most of their growing up in the lakefront town of Pinconning, Michigan. After their mother remarried, they gained a younger brother.
The dynamic of it is what you would normally think of a family. It was brothers and sisters. We poked at each other. We argued. We cared for each other. Alan was very independent on his own. He went and he hunted. He didn't do a lot of fishing or anything like that, but he was an outdoorsman.
As he grew older, Alan discovered his true passion didn't lie in the wilderness, but in his stepfather's garage.
Alan seemed to be very mechanically inclined. Working on his car was one of his big things he really enjoyed.
He always spoke about wanting to get a Pontiac Trans Am, and he was so proud of it when he finally got it. It was a 1980 Pontiac Trans Am. He took out the automatic transmission. He put the 4-speed Pontiac transmission into it. That was his pride and joy.
The sports car was also Alan's ticket out of rural Michigan.
Alan left home when he was 17. Him and my stepdad were having issues, and he just thought he'd be better off on his own.
Eager to escape the harsh winters, Alan headed south to sunny Vero Beach, Florida. To make ends meet, he took a job at an electronics store.
He could carry himself and be intimidating. So when he would do repossessions, he really did not have a lot of issues getting any property back.
He got himself established. He was making pretty good money, and he was enjoying the warmer weather. He was doing well for himself down there.
By the mid-'80s, Alan was living a fairly comfortable life, and he met a young woman named Connie Evers to share it with.
The first time I met Connie, she seemed like a really nice lady. She was very approachable. She made you feel comfortable around her. She had a southern thing to her.
Connie had 2 boys from a previous relationship. The 2 boys did not live with them, but I know he spent time with those boys. Alan seemed to be more mature, more settled. They were happy. Their life was going good.
In 1986, Alan and Connie decided to get married.
You could see that it's love. I mean, the holding hands and feeding each other cake. They were really very happy.
But only 5 years later, This picture-perfect family has been torn apart by violence. A vicious shooting has left Alan dead on his living room floor, and his wife and children are nowhere to be found.
The house had been ransacked. Connie wasn't there. Obviously, there had been a struggle because there's a dead body in the living room. So there's always a concern that perhaps there's another victim.
Detectives notify state law enforcement to be on the lookout for Connie while they begin their investigation into Alan's death.
After talking to the neighbors, we knew what time approximately Alan Pfieffer got home. Some people heard gunshots. The music was still on. The music stayed on until 4 o'clock in the morning until finally somebody called in.
The medical examiner's office removed the body for an autopsy. When the ballistics examiner looked at the bullets removed from the victim's body, he determined that they were .38 caliber.
The murder weapon was not found inside the trailer or outside of the trailer.
Police obviously are looking at this and they're like, this doesn't add up. This was a trap set up for Alan Pfieffer. What was the motive?
The neighbors shared with our detectives that they heard many fights between Connie and Alan. They expected marital problems and that they thought that at one point that Mr. Pfieffer had another girlfriend.
The question arose, was this a spurned lover or a love triangle? And the biggest question for the police is, where's Connie Pfieffer?
Coming up, investigators take a closer look at Alan and Connie's marriage.
They weren't in a good place in their marriage.
And discover there was another woman with a possible motive.
I heard an argument they had last week. She has the nerve to open the door and walk in and start causing a scene.
As the investigation into the shooting death of Alan Pfieffer continues, detectives' concerns for his missing wife and children grow.
As a married couple, at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. when they show up there, why isn't Connie in the trailer? Is something happened to her? Is she somewhere in the near vicinity, lying dead? They need to track her down.
The police began to contact her mother and her brother, who in turn try to reach her.
Connie's loved ones tell investigators they don't know where she is. Alan's family say they haven't been in contact with Connie either, and they are stunned when they're told what's happened.
It was on a Sunday. We were just getting ready to go to church. My mom answered the phone. All I can remember is my mother's, I don't know, I can't even say shock. You don't know how to react to news that you would never expect to get.
I remember Mom, she telling me, she said, Cheryl, you got to sit down. And then when she said Alan had been killed, I wasn't prepared for that. That was hard.
When asked about the rumored affair, family members say Connie had mentioned it previously, but they thought the couple had moved past it.
They never gave any indication that there were issues.
Nothing was out of the ordinary. He didn't seem to have any problems. But Alan was also kind of a private man. If he was unhappy, he hid it.
The one person who might be able to shed some light on the situation is Connie, but investigators are unable to track her down. Just as they are beginning to suspect the worst, Connie surprises everyone.
At 1:16, I believe, in the afternoon on the 24th, Mom showed up with Connie at the police department.
Connie was very distraught. She was crying.
She had just lost her husband. It was as much of a shock to her as it was to us.
They ask her, where were you? Where have you been? She indicates that she took her kids to her mother's where they were staying. And then she had spent the evening at the fair, and she had stayed with some friends.
Connie says she came as soon as she got the news of Alan's death. But now that police know she isn't a victim, they have to rule her out as a suspect.
Being, of course, that you weren't there and we had such a hard time locating you.
Connie told investigators that she was at the county fair with 3 of her friends, Paul Evans, Sarah Thomas, and Donna Waddell. Investigators located all 3 of those individuals.
They talked with Sarah Thomas, and they talked with Donna Waddell, and they talked with Paul Evans, and everything did seem to mesh at that point.
When detectives ask Connie why she didn't come home that night, she says it was because she was afraid.
Why were you scared to go home Saturday?
Because I had been out drinking and I was out late and I was disobeying his orders.
What did Alan order you to do?
You're supposed to do things his way if you don't, he gets mad and stuff like that.
Connie tells investigators that she and Alan were married, but it wasn't a good relationship. They weren't in a good place in their marriage.
Alan's attitude lately?
It fluctuated. Sometimes he would be okay, and there were days when he was meaner to where it was actually like he wanted to hurt me. You know, not physically, but just out of nowhere, he would just start saying mean, cruel things to try and hurt my feelings.
Connie also confirms that Alan has had several affairs over the years they've been married.
When was the last time you knew of him having an affair?
He was having one now.
You knew he was still having one now?
Yes. I caught him a month or 2 ago, and he led me to believe that it was finished.
According to Connie, Alan's girlfriend wouldn't take no for an answer.
I heard an argument they had last week because she found out where we lived. She had the nerve to open the door and walk in and start causing a scene and causing him names, and he shoved her back out the door and he told her not to bother him anymore, quit coming around him, and stay away from the house and everything else. Everything, because he told me he wanted to try again, you know, make things work and everything else.
What's her name?
June.
For investigators, Connie's interview points to new and concerning theories.
One of the thoughts that you have is maybe a jealous girlfriend possibly harmed him, or maybe Connie Pfieffer was trying to throw them off her trail and maybe pointing the finger at the girlfriend. So at this point, we have to find June and try to verify her whereabouts, see what she had to say.
After concluding their interview with Connie Pfieffer and confirming her alibi, detectives investigating Alan Pfeiffer's murder now have more than one woman from Alan's life on their radar.
The investigators certainly had a suspicion that Connie was somehow involved, but they didn't have any evidence that she was involved because her alibi checked out.
Investigators waste no time in tracking down her husband's latest lover. She claims Alan never tried to break up with her.
Investigators went and found June, and they spoke to her about the relationship. She said that they'd been seeing each other for a while and that she wanted Alan to leave Connie, but that she would never harm him whatsoever. June had an alibi that night. She was at work. The investigators were able to rule her out.
According to June, if anyone had a reason to kill Alan, it was Connie.
June provided a lot of background information as far as what was going on between Connie and Alan, that he and Connie were really on the outs and they were about ready to break up and divorce. Things had gotten so bad that Alan had basically given her an ultimatum, you're out in a week. Connie had to be in a panic at this point. Connie had 2 children from a previous relationship. She was working a small job in which she was not making a lot of money. So she was completely dependent upon Alan Pfieffer. She couldn't make it on her own.
When investigators looked into Connie's background, she didn't really have a criminal history. But they did learn that she and Alan had taken out a couple of life insurance policies worth $120,000 on Alan's life about a month before the murder.
In 1991, $120,000 was a lot of money.
By itself, the life insurance policy isn't proof of anything, but detectives find the terms of the contract interesting.
It was learned that, they had to be married for her to collect insurance. That's an aha moment. It really is.
If she divorced Alan, she wouldn't have anything.
To homicide investigators, it's a compelling motive. But they can't prove Connie had anything to do with Alan's murder.
They had reasons to believe that she may have been involved, but they just didn't have any real evidence at that time.
We can't break her alibi.
She's got 3 friends that are all saying basically the same story. Her mother's given the same story, and she's sticking to exactly what she's saying.
Despite their suspicions, police have to consider the possibility that neither Alan's wife nor his girlfriend are responsible for his death. They spend the next several months searching for other suspects.
We spend hundreds of hours trying to get leads, looking at things evidence-wise to see maybe there's a connection, to try to come up with something to locate who could have possibly done this.
We had talked to all the neighbors. We had talked to all the family members. We had talked to coworkers. We had talked to her alibi. We had talked to anybody on the periphery that we could find.
There was just nothing solid enough for us to go forward on.
As the months turn into years, investigators fight to keep the investigation alive.
As the investigation had stalled, Connie had taken her proceeds from her life insurance policy and moved to Ocala, several hours away, and bought a large piece of property and was living there.
We never forgot about the case. It was always on our minds. We wanted to bring justice.
We would have family members call in, asking us if anything else has happened.
In the 6 years that was going on, what I thought is it was a robbery. Maybe they'll catch him. Maybe they won't.
In 1997, 6 years after Alan was gunned down in his home, investigators' persistence finally pays off when a witness comes forward and blows the case wide open.
She was the one who was going to finally tell the truth.
Coming up, investigators learn the details of a diabolical murder plot.
The only word that comes to my mind is cold.
And the alleged mastermind is a woman driven by greed and desperation.
She could not take the idea of being broke again, so she decided to take it all.
"6 years after Alan Pfieffer's murder, one of the 3 friends who'd corroborated his wife's alibi has come to police to make a shocking confession.
The first real break in the case was when Sarah Thomas confessed to her involvement and the truth of what had happened. Sarah's conscience got to her. She came forward because she wanted to get that weight off of her shoulders.
Appreciate you coming down, Sarah.
Can I ask you a question before I go on? Am I going to get in trouble for anything I say?
No, you're here voluntarily. You're not under arrest.
According to Sarah, the rumors of an impending divorce between Alan and Connie were true.
Something was wrong with their relationship.
Where did you hear this from?
From Paul.
That she was dating?
Yeah.
We were able to determine that Alan Pfieffer wasn't the only one having an affair, that Connie had also had affairs.
She said that he and Connie were really on the outs and they were about ready to break up and divorce.
We knew she was making $175 a week. She didn't even own the car that she drove. She was going to be left with nothing once she didn't have Alan.
Based on Sarah's statement, it seemed like the reality of being out on the street with her 2 children pushed Connie to desperation.
Sarah Thomas then begins to tell how Connie could not take the idea of being broke again, so she decided to take it all.
To her, he was worth more dead than alive.
Connie knew it would be tricky to get rid of Alan and collect the insurance by herself. So she enlisted the aid of her friends.
Sarah and Paul Evans were boyfriend and girlfriend.
You were living with Paul and Donna at the time.
They met Connie about 3 months before the homicide and became friends with her.
Sarah Thomas had dropped out of school. She wasn't working. So there she was living with Paul and Donna, and they were barely making it. They were barely able to pay the rent at their house.
Sarah tells investigators that Connie offered to make all of their financial problems disappear.
If he helped her out and if I didn't say anything about it, then she would be more than willing to compensate us with stuff and money that she got back.
Once Alan was out of the way, she would have the trailer, she'd have the cars, and she'd have $120,000 in life insurance.
The plan was for Paul to shoot Alan. The problem was nobody had a gun. Donna remembered that her father had a gun that he kept hidden under his mattress. So the day of the murder, Donna and Paul went to her parents' house. Paul broke in, stole the gun, and then left.
Sarah says the plan was for Paul to carry out the murder, while the rest of them provided Connie with an alibi.
We went to the fair so we would be seen.
And of course, you could say Paul was with us, but at the same time, Paul was back at the trailer.
Right.
Donna and Sarah drove Paul back to the trailer while Connie stayed at the county fair to continue to establish that alibi.
Paul was going to hide in the trailer and kill Alan as he came in the door. In order to hide the gunshots, Paul had turned the stereo up very loud and waited.
Paul Evans ambushed Alan and shot him. He fell towards the couch, and before he could move, Paul shot him 2 more times at close range.
After the deed was done, Paul ransacked the trailer to make it look like a burglary, then made his escape.
We had a time set to go pick him back up.
What was he dressed in?
Dark clothes, black shirt, and black jeans.
Later, they drove out to an area that's desolate where there's canals and threw the gun in a canal. Now we know exactly what happened. We know our shooter, and we know who hired our shooter. Connie was the mastermind behind all this. She had the most to gain. She wanted her husband gone. She was dealing with people that were quite a bit younger than her at the time. She's very influential over them.
But in a case where there's no murder weapon, there's no fingerprints, and there's no DNA, the statement of just one person may not be enough to convict somebody of a crime.
"6 years after the death of Alan Pfieffer, detectives finally have a witness who can testify to Connie Pfieffer's role in her husband's murder, along with her alleged co-conspirators Donna Waddell and Paul Evans. But to bring her to justice, they know they'll need more than a statement.
One of the things that stood out the most is Donna Waddell's father had a .38 caliber revolver, stolen the very same day as the homicide. I went to Mr. Waddell's house and I asked him, "Did you have any more ammunition from when the gun was stolen?" He provides me with this ammunition. I send it down to our crime lab and they're able to determine it's the same exact ammunition that was used in the homicide.
The evidence corroborates Sarah Thomas's story and implicates her friend, Donna Waddell.
So investigators asked Sarah if she would wear a wire and go have a conversation with Donna.
Sarah agrees and convinces Donna to meet her at her house.
As an investigator, you're praying. We sit outside in our van and we listen. And we hear Sarah go inside and say, "Hey, listen. The cops are questioning me about this homicide again. What should I do?"
Donna's like, she goes, just stick to the story. There's nothing they can do as long as we stick to the story.
If Donna didn't have anything to hide, why would she say, stick to the story? Obviously, there must be a story to stick to.
Donna's comments remain vague, but just as it appears she might not take the bait, she makes a crucial mistake.
She goes, I think about it all the time. We were so young and foolish for doing this, but we helped. Donna says that several times on the tape.
She said, "I wish we had never done it."
So at this point, we arrest Donna. We bring her to the Vero Beach Police Department. Her attorney comes down. They listen to the conversation between her and Sarah and realize the jig's up.
Donna admits to her role in Alan's murder, but like Sarah, she insists Connie was the one pulling the strings.
To have two people who, years after the fact, are telling the same story.
Armed with confessions from two of Connie's co-conspirators, detectives try to get the third to flip as well.
Sarah and Paul had a relationship in the prior years. We go to his residence with Sarah wired one more time. Sarah extremely nervous because she said Paul was very dangerous and she was worried about him. It really took guts. We're in a surveillance van. We have officers on each side of this apartment complex where Paul Evans lives.
Unfortunately, Paul is much more careful than Donna.
She would ask him questions, and all that law enforcement could hear on that wire was a rustling sound. Paul was writing his answers down on a piece of paper, and then he would burn the piece of paper.
She called him out at some point and says, "I'm not wired. Why are you writing?" And he continued to write. He would not speak. We were worried about her safety, and at that point, we arrested Paul Evans.
Police storm the apartment and arrest Paul and charge him with first-degree murder. He's immediately brought in for questioning.
Myself and Detective Cook were in the interview. Paul Evans was dressed in all black, and he had his knees up to his chest in a curled type position, sitting up.
His demeanor was a little defiant, but also you could tell that he appeared to be like, they finally got me. He acknowledged that something did occur, but then he lawyered up. After we arrest Paul, we had to get to Connie before word spread, because we knew that somebody would contact her and let them know that the other three were arrested. I run a check from her driver's license and find out that she's living in Ocklawaha, Florida. We end up going to her residence, which was far off in a wooded area in the middle of nowhere. She looked at us as if she expected this day to happen. No emotion, no surprise. It was like, you guys finally got here. And I was like, she knew this the whole time. This day was coming.
After a 6-year investigation, Connie Pfieffer is arrested on July 21st, 1997, for the murder of her husband, Alan.
She never confessed to anything. She immediately asked for an attorney, and then she was just taken back to the jail cell.
When I found out Connie was arrested and found out that they had planned this, it was like jaw-dropping, because it just never, ever entered my mind.
In exchange for her cooperation, Donna Waddell is offered a plea deal. Donna receives a 10-year sentence for providing the murder weapon, while Sarah escapes criminal charges altogether.
Sarah was there and aware of it, but, didn't have the active role in the murder. There wasn't enough to charge her with any crime.
We proceed to trial against Paul Evans, and he's prosecuted for the first-degree murder of Alan Pfieffer. During his trial, every time that I would look over, he always had a little smirk on his face, like he thought it was quite amusing that he was there.
Paul was ultimately the one that pulled the trigger. He knew full well what he was doing.
Paul Evans is found guilty and sentenced to the death penalty. In 1999, Connie's trial begins. Connie's defense is that her friends planned and carried out the murder on their own because they needed the money. But when Donna Waddell takes the stand, she says all of them walked away empty-handed.
To your knowledge, did Paul Evans ever receive any fee for murdering Alan Pfieffer?
Not that I'm aware of.
Did you?
No.
Did Sarah?
Not that I'm aware of.
When did you first become aware that someone wanted Alan Pfieffer dead?
Connie had said that she had wanted to get rid of her husband. She wanted to have her husband killed because she couldn't divorce him, and if we would help.
Her testimony is confirmed by Sarah Thomas.
Connie had asked Donna if she knew of anybody that would kill her husband.
When you have multiple people saying essentially the same thing, that's very powerful evidence for a jury to hear. Connie was very quiet in the courtroom. You didn't hear anything from her. You didn't see any reaction.
The only word that comes to my mind is cold.
After a lengthy trial, Connie is found guilty for first-degree murder.
We sought the death penalty against Connie. So after her conviction, she did testify during the penalty phase of her trial, and that's the first time that we heard Connie speak. She didn't answer any questions about the actual murder. Instead, she focused on the alleged abuse that she suffered at the hands of Alan.
Al, if you would, explain the relationship that existed between you and Alan Pfieffer. Was there abuse that took place in this relationship?
Yes, there was. There was the time that he took me by the hair and just kept pounding my head into the floor.
Her testimony was almost exclusively about how Alan had been a very abusive spouse to her. And so in Connie's case, the jury recommended life.
Connie receives life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the unthinkable pain she caused continues to be felt by Alan's family.
She needs to spend the rest of her life behind bars. She took a life for no other reason than money. And there's nothing she can do to make that right.
Alan really did love his family. 30 years. Robbed 30 years of our life to spend with him. It's hard to think about that part of it.
I actually have a picture of him up on my wall in my living room. And I look at it every day. He's never far from my thoughts. He's a piece of me.
The Architects of Deception, a novelization of shadow lives and stolen identities. Prologue, The Mask. The mirror does not lie, but the man staring into it does. In the soft glow of a California morning, 1979, the man who called himself Dr. Gerald Barnes adjusted his stethoscope. It was a prop, though a functional one. To the world, it was a symbol of healing, of authority, of a life dedicated to the preservation of pulse and breath. To Gerald Barnbaum, it was the final piece of a costume he had been perfecting since he left Chicago in a cloud of disgrace. He liked the weight of the lab coat. It had a specific stiffness, a clinical white that suggested purity. He practiced his doctor's smile in the glass worm, reassuring, just the right amount of paternal concern. He wasn't just a pharmacist with a revoked license anymore. He was an actor who had found the role of a lifetime, and the stage was the Pacific Southwest Medical Group. 400 miles away, the real Dr. Gerald Barnes was waking up in Stockton, unaware that his name, his hard-earned credentials, and his very soul had been harvested by a ghost. Chapter 1, The Assistant's Shadow. Rick D'Alessandro liked his boss. That was the problem. In the busy hallways of the Orange County Clinic, Dr. Barnes was a breath of fresh air. He was a likable little guy. As Rick would often describe him quick with a joke, easy to talk to, and possessed of a charismatic energy that made patients feel better before he even examined them. "Morning, Rick," Barnes said, breezing past the reception desk with a stack of charts. "Beautiful day to save some lives, isn't it?" Rick smiled, checking the clipboard. "We've got a full house, Doc, 25 scheduled, and the walk-ins are already lining up." "The more the merrier," Barnes replied, his eyes twinkling behind scholarly spectacles. Rick watched him go, a small frown creeping onto his face. There was something about the way Barnes handled the more complex cases, a certain hesitation, a reliance on routine prescriptions. But in a high-volume clinic, efficiency was king. Barnes was efficient. He was the director. He was the man with the answers. Or so everyone thought. Chapter 2, The December Chill. December 26, 1979. The holiday spirit was a fading echo, replaced by the gray reality of a winter morning. John Mackenzie walked into the clinic, and even from across the room, Rick could see the man was vibrating with exhaustion. At 29, Mackenzie should have been in the prime of his life, but he looked like a candle guttering in the wind. His skin was sallow, his eyes sunken, and his gait was unsteady. "I don't feel right, Rick," Mackenzie whispered, his voice dry as parchment. "Thirsty, so thirsty, and dizzy. It's like the floor won't stay still." Rick ushered him into exam room 3. "The doctor will see you in a moment, John. Hang in there." When Barnes entered the room, he didn't see a man on the brink of a diabetic coma. He saw a script to be followed. He listened to the complaints: excessive urination, dry mouth, the loss of equilibrium. Inner ear disturbance, Barnes pronounced with the practiced ease of a veteran clinician. A touch of vertigo. Happens after the holiday stress, diet, the usual. He scribbled on a pad. An anti-vertigo drug. Something to stop the spinning. "But the thirst, Doc?" Mackenzie asked, clutching a paper cup of water like it was a holy relic. "Your body is reacting to the imbalance," Barnes said, patting him on the shoulder. "Take the pills. We'll run some blood work just to be safe, but you'll be fine by New Year's." Barnes sent him home. He didn't check for the sweet scent of ketones on the man's breath. He didn't notice the classic signs of a body eating itself. He had 39 other patients to see. He had a role to play. And John Mackenzie was just a bit player in the grand drama of Gerald Barnbaum's ego. Chapter 3, 1200. The lab results came back the next day. Dr. Barnes was off, enjoying the perks of his stolen prestige. Rick D'Alessandro was the one who opened the folder. He expected the usual slightly elevated cholesterol, maybe a minor infection. Instead, he saw a number that made his heart stop. Glucose, 1,200 milligrams DL. Normal was 80 to 100. 1,200 was a death sentence. It was a level so high the blood was practically syrup. "Oh, God," Rick whispered. He didn't wait for a supervisor. He didn't wait for Barnes. He grabbed the phone and dialed Mackenzie's number. Ring, ring, ring. No answer. He called the emergency contact Tan ex-wife. She hadn't seen him. He called the other numbers on the chart. Silence. A cold dread settled in Rick's stomach. He looked at the chart again. Barnes had prescribed an anti-vertigo medication. He had sent a man in active, acute diabetic crisis home with a pill for dizziness. I need the police, Rick told the dispatcher, his voice trembling. Garden Grove PD. We have a patient. I think he's in danger. Chapter 4, The Kitchen Floor. The officers broke the door in. The apartment was quiet, the air heavy with the stillness of a life interrupted. They found John Mackenzie in the kitchen. He was lying on the floor, his body cold, his eyes staring at a ceiling he couldn't see. In his hand, clutched tightly like a failed talisman, was the prescription Dr. Barnes had given him. The anti-vertigo drug. The 29-year-old had collapsed into a coma and died alone, his body starving for insulin while he followed the expert advice of a man who didn't know the difference between a balance disorder and a metabolic catastrophe. When Rick heard the news, the grief was quickly overtaken by a burning, incandescent rage. A doctor might make a mistake, but this felt like a void where knowledge should have been. Rick sat in the quiet of the empty clinic that evening. He looked at the framed diploma on Barnes's wall. He looked at the medical board registration. Something felt hollow. Something felt wrong. He picked up the phone and called the medical board in Sacramento. I need to verify the identity of a Dr. Gerald Barnes, Rick said. Could you fax over his identification photo and file? The fax machine hummed to life. The paper slid out, inch by agonizing inch. Rick watched as the image formed. The man in the photo was older, different features, a different bone structure. The address listed was in Stockton, 400 miles away. Rick looked at the photo, then at the empty chair in the director's office. You're not him, Rick whispered to the shadows. Who the hell are you? Chapter 5. The Pharmacist of Chicago. The investigation into the man who would be king of the clinic revealed a history built on layers of deception. Before he was Dr. Barnes, he was Gerald Barnbaum. In Chicago, he had been a pharmacist, a man who understood the chemistry of medicine but lacked the ethics of it. He had been caught in a Medicaid scam, a greedy little grift that cost him his license. But Barnbaum was a performer. He had been a theater student in college. He knew how to project a character. If he couldn't be a pharmacist, he would be something better, something more powerful. He had called the medical board, posing as the real Dr. Barnes. He told them he had lost his duplicate license and was opening a clinic in Los Angeles. They, trusting the name and the professional tone, mailed him the credentials without a second thought. It was that easy. A phone call, a lie, and a white coat. On August 8, 1980, The curtain finally fell. The police arrived not to discuss a patient, but to escort the leading man to a cell. The charge, practicing medicine without a license, and, more importantly, manslaughter. But as Gerald Barnbaum sat in the back of the cruiser, he wasn't crying. He was already thinking about his next role. Chapter 6, the second act. Prison was supposed to be the end of the story. For the family of John Mackenzie, 3 years felt like a slap in the face. For the real Dr. Barnes, the damage to his name was a wound that wouldn't heal. But Gerald Barnbaum was a man of habit. 18 months later, he was out on good behavior. He walked out of the prison gates, looked at the California sun, and realized he didn't know how to be anyone else. He didn't go back to Chicago. He didn't find a trade. He went to a different city, found a different clinic, and put on a different white coat. He became Dr. Gerald Barnes again. He even got married. Lisa Roberts thought she had found the perfect husband. He was a doctor, a provider, a romantic who showered her with flowers and took her to concerts. He earned a 6-figure salary. He was the medical director of a Los Angeles facility. "I'm so proud of you, Gerald," she would say as she kissed him goodbye in the morning. "It's all for you, darling," he would reply. He lived this life for years. He saw patients. He ordered tests. He performed physicals for FBI agents. He was so good at the role that even the government's premier law enforcement agency didn't check the credentials of the man sticking a tongue depressor into their throats. Until a Christmas party in 1996. Rick D'Alessandro was there. He had moved on with his life, but he never forgot the face of the man who killed John Mackenzie. He was standing near the punch bowl when he saw a familiar, likable little guy wearing a name tag. "Hi, I'm Dr. Barnes." The world stopped. Rick felt the blood rush to his ears. It had been 16 years, but the mask was identical. "Hi, Rick," the man said, his voice as smooth as silk. "How are you doing?" Rick stared at him, his fists clenching. "Well, Gerald, I'm not doing too well, because you're doing the same thing you did back in the 70s. The doctor didn't flinch. He gave a small, sad smile. "Well, you know, Rick, this is all just a big mistake." He walked away, disappeared into the crowd, and then disappeared from the city. But the FBI was now on the trail. Chapter 7, The Highway Ghost. While Barnbaum was a predator of the clinic, a different kind of architect was emerging in the heart of the Midwest. David Brankel didn't wear a white coat. He wore expensive suits. He drove a black BMW. He was a businessman, a developer, a man with a vision. In Bloomington, Indiana, Brankel was the man to know. He rented an office from Phil and Bonnie Sperry, claiming to run an architectural and construction firm called ACR. Architecture, construction. And what's there for? David. Phil Sperry asked one afternoon over coffee. Brankle smiled, a smooth, practiced expression that reached his eyes but didn't warm them. Results, Phil, always results. But the R stood for robbery. Brankle was a man of dualities. Sunday through Wednesday, he was a family man in Vincennes, living in a rented house with a wife and a young son. Thursday through Saturday, he was a ghost on the interstate. He would drive his black BMW, a car he couldn't afford to grocery store banks, tucked inside Winn-Dixies and Meagers. He used a simple disguise, a fishing hat, a mustache, a pair of tan coveralls. He would walk up to the teller and hand over a note. "I have a gun. Be quiet. Go home alive." He was efficient. He was calm. He was the Interstate Bank Mart Bandit IBM, and he was driving a path of financial destruction across 6 states. He had an accomplice, a woman named Donna Hewins. She was the Bonnie to his Clyde, a waitress he met at a club who fell for the thrill and the dapper suits. She sat in the idling BMW while David walked into the stores, a scanner in his hand, listening to the police frequencies. He was playing a game with the world. He was the successful entrepreneur by day and the most prolific bank robber in the region by night. He believed he was smarter than the detectives, smarter than the FBI, and certainly smarter than the people he scammed. Chapter 8, Operation Intercept. Detective Larry Duncan of the Louisville Metro Police was a man of maps. He sat in his office, staring at a cluster of pins that traced the path of the IBM bandit. Indianapolis, Louisville, Cincinnati. The pins followed the interstates like a trail of breadcrumbs. "He's using the highways as his veins," Duncan muttered to his colleagues, Joe Schley and Agent Freihofer. He jumps on the I-65 or the I-71, and he's gone before the first cruiser arrives. Duncan had a theory. The bandit wasn't just a criminal, he was a commuter. He was likely based in Indiana, traveling out to hit targets and returning to his safe zone. In 2003, Duncan launched Operation Intercept. He placed undercover officers inside 5 target banks. He coordinated with 1,200 officers across the city. The trap was set. On September 6th, the IBM bandit struck hit number 35. The radio crackled. Operation Intercept. Operation Intercept. The call was too loud, too frantic. David Brankle, sitting in his BMW with the scanner hissing in his ear, heard the panic in the officer's voice. He didn't head for the interstate. He took the back roads. He slipped through the residential streets, weaving like a snake through the tall grass of the suburbs. Duncan watched the black sedan vanish on the horizon of his map. "He's gone," Duncan said, leaning back in his chair. "He's listening. He's always listening." Chapter 9, The Final Curb. Luck is a finite resource. For David Brankle, It ran out on a stretch of Highway 45 in December 2003. He was driving too fast. He was always driving too fast. He cut off a vehicle, nearly sending it into oncoming traffic. Unfortunately for Brankel, the man behind the wheel was Bloomington Detective Kevin Hill. The chase that followed was a symphony of screaming tires and 100-mile-per-hour desperation. Brankel disregarded stop signs. He ran people off the road. He was a man who had built a life on the belief that he could never be caught, and now the reality was catching up in his rearview mirror. He escaped the immediate pursuit, but he left behind a clue. He had dropped his license. Days later, in Vincennes, the Indiana State Police surrounded a house at 1919 Hickory. Brankel tried to run one last time. He abandoned his young son in the car, a final, chilling testament to his narcissism, and fled on foot through an apartment complex. He tripped on a curb. The Interstate Bank Mart bandit, the man who had hit 43 banks and stolen $136,000, fell face first into the dirt. As Sergeant Greg Winkler clicked the handcuffs into place, a small knife fell out of Brankel's pocket. It just fell out. Brankel stammered, the smooth businessman gone, replaced by a shivering, pathetic figure. I wasn't going to hurt you. Chapter 10, The Interrogation Room. The two worlds of deception met in the cold fluorescent light of an interrogation room. In one city, Gerald Barnbaum was being sentenced to 12.5 years, weeping about his prostate cancer and his grandchildren, even as the judge warned that he would do it all again if given a chance. In Vincennes, David Brankel sat across from Larry Duncan. I'm the guy you're looking for, Brankel said, leaning forward as if he were about to offer a business deal. I'm the IBM bandit. Call Louisville. Call Cincinnati. They'll want to talk to me. For 6 hours, Brankel talked. He told them about the first robbery. He told them about Donna. He told them about his mother, who told him he couldn't even mow the lawn right. He was a man who wanted to be the most successful bank robber of all time because he couldn't be anything else. He showed no remorse for the people he had cheated, the Sperrys, the Logans. He claimed he did legitimate work for them. He was a sociopath who had absolute no conscience. Chapter 11, The FBI's Doctor. Marie Konjovsky, an FBI agent, stared at the file on her desk in disbelief. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. The Bureau had a contract with a clinic in Los Angeles to perform employment physicals. For years, the man sitting in that office, the one who had checked the heartbeats and reflexes of over 100 FBI agents, was a man the government had already put behind bars. Gerald Barnbaum hadn't just fooled a clinic. He had fooled the premier investigative agency in the world. While the Bureau scrambled to assess the damage, Lisa Roberts sat in her living room, the space that used to be filled with the warmth of a loving husband. She now referred to him as the Never Was. I didn't know his real name. she whispered to the investigators. I didn't know his real age. Every night I shared a bed with a ghost. I trusted him with my life, my family, my future. Lisa realized that Barnbaum hadn't just stolen a name from a doctor in Stockton. He had stolen the years she could never get back. He had been a master of the mundane, playing the role of the devoted husband so convincingly that she never questioned why he never talked about his childhood or why he was so vague about his medical school days. Chapter 12. The Bus Ticket Blunder. In the world of bureaucracy, sometimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. After his 1996 conviction, Barnbaum was serving his time in a federal facility. In 2000, he was scheduled for a transfer because he had been categorized as a low-security inmate, decision that baffled Agent Konjovsky. The Bureau of Prisons didn't use a secure transport. They gave Gerald Barnbaum a bus ticket. They told him to report to a facility in Illinois. Barnbaum took the ticket, walked out of the prison gates, and immediately vanished. He didn't go to Illinois. He went back to the only life he knew how to live. A month later, U.S. Marshal Joseph Exner walked into a North Hollywood clinic. He had a hunch. He didn't look for a man in a jumpsuit. He looked for a man in a lab coat. Gerald Barnbaum. Exner called out. A man stepped out of an exam room. He was wearing a crisp white coat, the stethoscope draped around his neck. He looked at the marshals and smiled that practiced. Clinical smile. You guys are good, Barnbaum said, turning around to be handcuffed. He had been back on the job for weeks, seeing patients, prescribing controlled substances, and collecting a paycheck as Dr. Gerald Barnes. He was 63 years old, and he was already planning his next comeback. Chapter 13. The $9 million lesson. The fallout from Barnbaum's final act at Executive Health Group was catastrophic. Carl Jansen, an executive at Atlantic Richfield, had been one of Dr. Barnes's patients. He had undergone a full physical, including a prostate exam performed by a man with no medical training. I saw him on the evening news the next day. Jansen recalled, the disgust still evident in his voice. Handcuffs. The evening news. I had trusted this man with my health, my privacy. Jansen wasn't alone. Nearly 500 former patients joined a civil lawsuit. The evidence revealed a shocking lack of diligence. Executive Health Group hadn't performed even a basic background check. If they had, they would have seen the multiple felony convictions and the trail of dead and duped patients. The company was forced to settle for over $9 million. It was a price paid for greed and negligence, and it put the firm out of business. But for the victims, the money didn't erase the feeling of being violated by an imposter. Chapter 14. The Pet Store Dream. While Barnbaum was a ghost in the clinic, David Brankel was a predator in the pet store. In Vincennes, Alan and Becky Logan were the embodiment of the American dream. They ran Logan's Wet Pets and More, a beloved local institution. They wanted to expand to build a family entertainment complex called Logan's Great Escape. When they met David Brankel, they thought their prayers had been answered. He looked like a gift from God, Becky remembered. He had the suits, the Vanguard Capital marketing materials, the timetables. He looked legit. Brankel charged them a $3,500 retainer and $500 a month. But his most chilling tactic involved his young son, Michael. On the first of every month, Brankel would walk into the pet store holding Michael's hand. He would have the boy hand the bill to Alan Logan. It was a prop, just like barn-bound stethoscope. The presence of the child created an atmosphere of trust, a sense that Brankel was a family man just like them. It's sad, Alan said years later, he used that boy to rob us. He had no conscience. Brankel was living a triple life, the devoted father in Vincennes, the entrepreneur in Bloomington, and the serial bank robber on the interstate. He was a sociopath who viewed people as meal tickets, and he didn't care who he stepped on to fund his dapper lifestyle. Chapter 15, The Last Act. In 2004, the curtain finally closed, at least for a while. David Brankel received 21 years in federal prison for 43 counts of bank robbery. Donna Hewins, the waitress who became his getaway driver, received house arrest and probation. Brankel owed $175,000 in restitution, but for the Logans and the Sperrys, not a dime would ever return. Brankel maintained to the end that his work for them was legitimate. In Minnesota, at Vasica Federal Prison, Gerald Barnbaum, now in his 70s, sat in his cell. His projected release was 2018. Investigators who had tracked him for decades were not under any illusions. His age won't make a difference, one detective noted. He's a very dangerous human being. When he walks through those doors, he will be a physician again. He doesn't know how to be anyone else. The architects of deception had been dismantled, but their legacy remained in the lives they shattered and the trust they broke. They were men who proved that in a world of credentials and suits, a mask can be more powerful than the truth. As long as there is greed, and as long as there is a desire to believe in the perfect professional, there will be men like Barnbaum and Brankel waiting in the shadows, ready to put on the coat and start the show all over again. To be continued. Red Bones. Book 1 of the Shetland Mysteries. Prologue, The Wind and the Wire. The wind across the Shetland Islands did not blow. It howled. It was a living, breathing entity that tore off the North Sea, tasting of salt, ancient ice, and bitter secrets. It scoured the treeless hills of Bresse, rattling the corrugated iron roofs of the old crofts and bending the heather until it snapped. In the deep, suffocating darkness of a Tuesday night, Mima Wilson sat in her armchair, listening to it. The fire in the hearth had burned down to glowing peat embers, casting long, wavering shadows across the faded floral wallpaper. Mima was a woman carved from the landscape itself, weathered, unyielding, holding onto the land of her ancestors with a grip that neither time nor the desperate pleas of her own son could loosen. She pulled her thick wear-upon shawl tighter around her frail shoulders. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked, a slow, methodical heartbeat in the silent room. Her gaze drifted to the window. Beyond the glass, the darkness was absolute, save for the faint, rhythmic sweep of the Bresse lighthouse cutting through the sea fret. Then another sound, a crunch of boots on the gravel outside. Mima froze. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the feral cats that sometimes sought shelter under the eaves. It was a heavy, deliberate step. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice raspy but firm. She wasn't a woman given to easy fright. She had lived through the war, through the treacherous nights of the Shetland bus, through the loss of her husband. Silence answered her. She slowly pushed herself up from the chair, her joints protesting. She moved toward the narrow hallway, her eyes darting to the old wooden cupboard where she kept the shotgun. It hadn't been fired in years, but the cold, heavy steel of it was a comfort she suddenly craved. "Is that you?" she called again, a sliver of uncertainty finally piercing her bravado. "Joseph?" The front door rattled. A shadow blocked the sliver of moonlight bleeding through the frosted glass. Mima's hand reached for the doorknob, hesitation warring with defiance. Then came the deafening roar. The glass shattered inward, a storm of jagged diamonds. The sheer force of the blast threw Mima backward, the world erupting into blinding white light and the sharp, metallic stench of cordite. She hit the floor, the sound of the wind rushing in through the broken door, mingling with the final, fading beat of her own heart. And then there was only the wind. Chapter 1, The Remains of the Morning. Detective Inspector Jimmy Perez woke to the sound of chaos. "Dad! Dad! Dad!" The voice belonged to his stepdaughter, Cassie, and it carried the distinct, frantic pitch of a teenager who was about to miss the morning ferry. Jimmy groaned, burying his face in the pillow for a fleeting second before the reality of single parenthood dragged him upward. The air in the house was freezing. The ancient boiler had given up sometime in the night again. He stumbled out of bed, running a hand through his dark, unruly hair. "I'm up, Cass. I'm up." He found her in the hallway, a whirlwind of school bags, half-eaten toast, and exasperation. She looked so much like her mother that sometimes it caught Jimmy off guard, a sharp pain beneath his ribs that he had learned to live with. "Have you got everything?" Jimmy asked, trying to inject some authority into his sleep-graveled voice. He picked up a stray mitten from the floor. "You got your gloves? Your homework?" Cassie spun around, her school tie hanging loose, glaring at the mitten as if it had personally offended her. "What do you think this is, Dad?" A fashion choice. It was Norse mythology this week. We had to build a longboat out of lolly sticks, and it's crumbling. Right. Don't be cheeky, Jimmy muttered, helping her balance the fragile, glue-smeared wooden structure on top of her textbooks. Just get your coat on. Well, don't pretend like you're organized. She shot back, though there was a fond smile playing at the corners of her mouth. We're 15 minutes late already. The ferry won't wait. And if I'm late for Mr. Henderson's class again, he's going to make me recite the entire lineage of Odin. We'll make it, Jimmy promised, grabbing his own coat, the heavy, dark wolf felt-like armor. The drive to the Lerwick ferry terminal was a blur of gray skies and biting rain. After dropping Cassie off with a quick kiss to her forehead and a stern warning to keep her mobile phone turned on, Jimmy headed toward the police station. Lerwick was waking up. The stone buildings huddled together against the cold, while the harbor bobbed with fishing trawlers and oil industry vessels. The air smelled of diesel, salt, and the faint, sweet scent of brewing coffee from the cafes on Commercial Street. The station was already buzzing when Jimmy walked in. He shed his wet coat, hanging it on the rack by the door. "Morning, Billy," Jimmy called out to the desk sergeant, who was busy trying to unjam the ancient photocopier. "Morning, Inspector," Billy replied, giving the machine a sharp smack. Jimmy walked into the main bullpen, rubbing his hands together to get the circulation going. "Morning, Craig. Anything exciting happen while I was trying to wrestle a Viking longboat into a Ford Focus?" Sergeant Craig McCabe, a solidly built man with a permanent look of mild amusement, looked up from his monitor. "Robert Junson's in the cells. Found him drunk in the market square at 3 this morning. He was singing." "Singing?" Jimmy raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Flower of Scotland?" "Worse. ABBA. Craig sighed. "Any news for the Up-Hellier committee?" "It's Justin. Kaiser Jarl thinks it'll be the best fire festival we've ever had." Jimmy smiled faintly. Up-Hellier was the lifeblood of the Shetland winter, a massive Viking fire festival that ended in the burning of a galley ship and a night of spectacular drinking. "Oh, I heard a rumor there's going to be a Lady Gaga squad this year. Big blonde wigs and meat dresses." Craig leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "You know anything about that?" "Well, you see, I do." Jimmy deadpanned. "But then, if I told you about it, I'd have to kill you." The banter was interrupted by the arrival of Duncan Hunter. Duncan was Cassie's biological father, a local businessman whose ambition was only matched by his knack for wearing expensive, deeply inappropriate Italian suits in the Shetland weather. He swaggered into the station as if he owned it. "Kicks off as usual at 9:45, Duncan announced to no one in particular, referring to the festival. "Your squad march along the esplanade to the ferry terminal. Fire to the galley at 8. Then drink will be taken. Copious amounts." Jimmy sighed. "Oi, Duncan, you coming to hand yourself in for crimes against fashion, or are you looking to sublet the holding cells and rent them out to tourists?" Duncan chuckled, unfazed. Well, that's not a bad idea. Jimmy, property is booming. But no, I'm actually here checking if you still need an engine for that old tugboat your dad's fixing up. I think I might have found one for you over in Aberdeen. Jimmy crossed his arms. And will there be a finder's fee involved in this miraculous discovery? Of course, Duncan grinned, flashing white teeth. What am I? A charity. Before Jimmy could retort, a sharp, choked noise drew his attention across the room. Detective Constable Sandy Wilson was standing by his desk, his hand gripping the telephone receiver so tightly his knuckles were white. The young officer's face had drained of all color, leaving his freckles standing out starkly against pale skin. He looked like he was going to be sick. "Tea?" Craig asked, oblivious, holding up a mug. "Excuse me," Jimmy said, his police instincts instantly overriding the casual morning atmosphere. He crossed the room quickly. "Sandy, what is it?" Sandy stared at the wall, his eyes wide and unseeing. "I'm sorry, Sandy," the voice on the other end of the line was saying, faintly audible in the quiet room. "I didn't quite catch that." Jimmy gently placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Sandy, talk to me." Sandy slowly turned his head. His breath was shallow. It's my grandmother's croft, over on Bresse." "Mima?" Jimmy asked softly. Sandy swallowed hard, tears suddenly welling in his eyes. "I don't understand. My cousin Ronald just called. He was driving past. He said she's been shot." Sandy's voice broke into a jagged whisper. "She's dead, sir." The air in the station seemed to vanish. The banter, the talk of festivals and boat engines evaporated, replaced by the chilling, heavy silence of murder. Chapter 2: Contamination. Jimmy Perez's mind shifted gears with the smooth, cold precision of a well-oiled machine. Grief was a luxury they did not have time for right now. "Okay," Jimmy said, his voice low, steady, and utterly commanding. He took the phone from Sandy's trembling hand and placed it back on the cradle. "Sandy, look at me." Sandy blinked, a tear tracking down his cheek. He looked impossibly young in that moment. "What I want you to do," Jimmy instructed, making sure he maintained eye contact, grounding the young officer, "is I want you to phone Billy on the landline and give him all the details. Every single thing Ronald told you. Do not leave anything out." Sandy nodded numbly. "I'm going to get the inter-island ferry to Bresse," Jimmy continued, already shrugging his heavy coat back on. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. You are going to go over there right now. You live closer to the ferry terminal." "My dad," Sandy stammered. "I need to tell my dad. Joseph." "No," Jimmy said sharply. "Your dad is a civilian. Right now, you are a police officer. You go to the croft. When you get there, you establish a perimeter. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir." Jimmy leaned in closer, his tone softening just a fraction, but the steel remained. Is there any sign of a break-in at the croft? Did Ronald say? He said there is some broken glass. The front door. Do you know if the neighbors heard anything? I don't know. Her nearest neighbor is miles away. There's just Ronald. His croft is just up the road. He passed by on his way back from the night shift, and she's just over the ridge. He saw the broken glass from the track. Jimmy processed the information. Bresse was sparsely populated. A shotgun blast in the middle of a storm might go entirely unnoticed. Could it have been an accident? Do you think a shotgun blast up close? Sandy shook his head, a look of profound sickness washing over him. No. I mean, Mima owns a gun, an old double barrel. She keeps it in the hall cupboard, but she wouldn't. We don't know what happened yet. Jimmy interrupted gently. Now listen to me carefully. Sandy, you get to that croft. What's the mobile signal like up there? Terrible. Comes and goes. You'll need to go up the hill behind the house to get a bar. Right. Okay, this is what I want you to do. I want you to use your radio or phone the hospital in Lerwick if you have to use the Crofts landline. But try not to contaminate anything. Get them to send an ambulance. Set up a common approach path for the medics and the forensics team. Put up a windshield if the weather is destroying evidence. Jimmy paused, searching Sandy's face. The boy was hungover, Jimmy realized with a flash of irritation. He could smell the stale alcohol, something sweet and cloying. You think you can handle that? Jimmy asked, his tone demanding a positive answer. Yeah, Sandy sniffed, wiping his nose with the back of his sleeve. Can I cover her up? The wind is awful today. No, Jimmy said, his voice flat. I'm sorry, Sandy. We need photographs. The scene has to remain exactly as it was found. Look, I know you were close to her, but we multifunction here. You're a detective today, not a grandson. Sandy nodded, his jaw tightening. He grabbed his coat and rushed out the door. Jimmy turned to Craig, who was already on the phone, organizing the crime scene investigators. Suddenly, Jimmy's mobile rang in his pocket. He pulled it out. The caller ID flashed, Tosh. D.C. Allison Tosh McIntosh was his newest transfer from the mainland. Brilliant, slightly chaotic, and currently supposed to be off duty. Inspector, Tosh's voice came through, bright and alert. Did I wake you? No, sir. I've been up for ages, Jimmy replied, his mind already on the ferry. Well, look, I could lose my signal at any moment on this crossing. I want you to get on the ferry to Bresse. Mima Wilson has been found dead. Shot. Shot? Tosh sounded taken aback. Gun violence in Shetland was incredibly rare. Understood. I'm on my way. Get here fast, Tosh, Jimmy said, stepping out of the station into the biting wind. And bring your game. This one is going to be messy. Chapter 3, Blood on the Heather. The ferry ride to Bresse took exactly 7 minutes, but to Jimmy Perez, it felt like hours. The gray waters of the Sound were choppy, the ferry rolling heavily over the swells. Jimmy stood on the open deck, ignoring the freezing spray, his eyes fixed on the approaching island. Bresse was a rugged, beautiful, and unforgiving place. Green hills rolled into dramatic cliffs that plummeted into the churning sea. Mima Wilson's croft sat isolated on a ridge, a lonely sentinel overlooking the water. By the time Jimmy's car navigated the narrow, winding single-track road and pulled up to the croft, the scene was already cordoned off with flapping blue and white police tape. The wind up here was vicious, tearing at Jimmy's clothes as he stepped out of the vehicle. He ducked under the tape and approached the small stone house. Sandy was standing near the front door, shivering violently, holding a digital camera. He looked 100 years older than he had that morning. "Sandy," Jimmy said, his voice come amidst the roaring wind. "Report." "The gun hasn't been fired for years, sir," Sandy said, his teeth chattering. "I checked the hall cupboard without touching anything. It's empty." "Did Mima own this place?" Jimmy asked, pulling on blue nitrile gloves. "Yeah, the land's been in the family for generations. Outside, out the back." Sandy pointed a shaking finger. "Has anyone called your dad?" "Yeah. And where's he now?" "At home, in Lerwick," Sandy said, looking down at his boots. "I told him not to come down. Did not feel right breaking the news like that on the mobile. But I had to tell him to stay away. I was worried about contamination." No, you did the right thing," Jimmy reassured him. It was a heavy burden for a son to bear, telling his father that his mother had been murdered. "Can you tell if anything's missing from the house?" "I don't think so," Sandy replied, his voice dull. "Look, Mima's phone was unplugged. I put it back in to call the hospital, used a pen to push the jack. She didn't have anything to steal. She always lived alone. Her granddad died young. My granddad died years ago. She just had this land." Jimmy stepped carefully toward the front